This happened about a decade ago. I grew up at a modest home, and for most of my childhood, I shared a bedroom with my older brother. We had 2 twin beds on opposite walls, 2 dressers, and 2 closets squeezed into the space. It wasn't suffocating, but it wasn't exactly roomy either. Once I moved out, it no longer mattered. After finishing school, my brother found a city job nearby and moved back in with our parents. And the first thing he did? Yep, he reclaimed our old bedroom, the one I had spent so much energy redesigning. I was irritated at first, but my parents reminded me that I had done the same thing to him, so it was only fair. I couldn't argue with that. By the time I graduated, I also found work in the city and decided to move back in with my parents. But now, I didn't have a room anymore. The only free space was the upstairs guest room, which was barely half the size of my old bedroom, but it had to do. That room sat beside my dad's office, the only other room on the top floor. It was also right above the garage, which meant the whole floor shook every time the garage door opened. Since the room jutted out at the corner of the house, it had 2 separate windows, one facing the driveway and one facing the side yard. Not perfect, but it was quiet and private most of the time. The incident I'm about to describe happened on a Friday night when I was home alone. My brother was away in Baltimore for work, and my parents were at the shore house for the weekend, like usual. After a brutal day at work, I didn't feel like going anywhere or hanging out with friends. I ordered food, then settled into bed around 11:30 with a book, hoping to wind down. The house was dead silent, which was rare and kind of nice. That's when I heard the sound that made my stomach drop the garage door opening. The vibrations rolled through the floor, the exact noise I had grown used to. At first, I brushed it off, until I remembered nobody was supposed to be home. My parents had told me clearly they'd be away until Sunday. My brother wasn't due back until Saturday afternoon. That's when the realization sank in, and my pulse shot up. I jumped out of bed and peered out the driveway window, but the darkness made it hard to see. The garage door was open, but I couldn't make out whether a car was inside. Without wasting time, I dug through the closet and grabbed an old baseball bat. As I crept down the stairs, I tried to calm myself with logical explanations. Maybe my parents forgot something and came back. Maybe my brother's trip was cut short. Or maybe the garage door had just malfunctioned. But then I heard faint voices. They were coming from the opposite side of the house, near the bedrooms. Too hushed to understand, but clearly more than one person. That's when it hit me. Strangers had broken in. I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and whispered to the operator that burglars were inside my house. They told me to stay quiet and hidden, but I felt an overwhelming compulsion to act. Ignoring the operator's instructions, I tightened my grip on the bat and crept down the hall toward the voices. From my parents' bedroom, I heard drawers opening and things being shifted around. They were looking for valuables. With adrenaline surging, I shouted as loud as I could and charged into the room, swinging the bat over my head. 2 men spun around in shock. They hadn't expected anyone home, much less someone willing to fight back. That gave me confidence, even though I knew I was outnumbered. I smashed the bat against one guy's leg, dropping him to the ground. The second man tackled me before I could swing again. We hit the floor hard, and I realized instantly that he was much stronger than me. He ripped the bat away and wrapped his hands around my throat. I clawed and fought back, but he tightened his grip. Then I saw the first man crawling toward us, holding what looked like a knife. In that moment, I thought I was about to die. As the room blurred and darkened, I could hear distant sirens growing louder. Right before everything went black, I saw the second man swing the bat at my head. When I came to, a police officer was kneeling beside me, asking if I was okay. My head throbbed painfully, but I was conscious. The bedroom door was wide open to the backyard. The intruders had fled as soon as they heard the sirens. Paramedics checked me over, but I refused the hospital. I gave the officers a full account, but the men were already long gone. Later, my parents tore into me for confronting them instead of hiding. And they were right, my reckless decision nearly got me killed. The burglars were never caught. My parents installed a full security system, cameras, sensors, lights, the works. But one detail gnawed at me. All the doors had been locked, and the garage could only be opened with a wireless button inside my car. Someone had to know where it was. Someone close. Even more unsettling, the intruders knew my family's schedule. They knew my parents were gone, and my brother was away. It felt personal. My dad became paranoid for months afterward, convinced it was someone familiar to us. I don't live there anymore, but I'll never forget that feeling, the moment I thought I was going to die. It's something I still can't fully shake. Story 2. This took place about 6 months ago, and even now I can't get over how deliberate and unsettling the entire ordeal was. I had just moved back to my hometown to help take care of my elderly mother, who lives around 20 minutes away. I ended up finding a small duplex that was perfect, close enough to get to her quickly in case of trouble, but far enough to still feel like I had my own independence. My mom has been struggling with minor health concerns lately. Nothing majorly life-threatening, but she's had a couple of small falls around the house, and she's incredibly stubborn when it comes to accepting help. I'd been encouraging her to get one of those medical alert pendants, but she kept brushing it off, saying I was worrying too much. It's been a huge source of stress for me, especially knowing that most of the time she's by herself. On this particular evening, I had just settled into the couch for the night. It was about 9 p.m., and I was watching TV when my phone rang. The number that popped up on the caller ID was local, but I didn't recognize it. Since I was still relatively new to the area, I figured it could be important and answered. A woman's voice introduced herself as a nurse from a nearby emergency department. She explained that my mother had been brought in after suffering a fall and hitting her head. She told me my mom was awake, but asking for me, and asked if I could get there quickly. My heart sank. This was the exact nightmare scenario I'd been bracing for since moving back. I didn't question the call for a second. The caller knew my mother's full name, her home address, and even referenced her hip replacement from earlier that year. I immediately grabbed my keys, whispered a quick prayer to steady myself, and rushed out. I didn't bother locking the door. I just pulled it shut and ran to my car. The drive to the hospital felt like forever, every possible scenario running through my mind, and most of them weren't good. When I arrived, I ran straight to the reception desk, gave my mom's name, and told them I'd just been called about her fall. The nurse looked confused, checked the system, and told me there was no patient under that name in their care that night. I was stunned. I insisted there had to be some mistake, since I'd literally just spoken to a nurse on the phone. The receptionist was kind, but firm. No one by that name had been admitted. They suggested I call my mother directly, so I stepped outside and dialed her landline. To my shock, she picked up, groggy from sleep, and asked why I was calling so late. I didn't want to scare her, so I told her I was just checking in, wished her good night, and hung up. That's when the truth hit me. It had been a setup. Someone had tricked me into leaving my house. I jumped back in my car, angry with myself for falling for it. When I pulled into my driveway, the front door looked untouched. For a second, I thought maybe I'd overreacted, but the moment I walked inside, I knew I'd been robbed. The place had been torn apart. For now, I've installed a Ring camera, hoping it's enough to deter anything further. If something else happens, I'll update. Story 3. I'm a single guy in my early 30s, living alone in a rented house for a little over a year now. It's nothing extravagant, but it's a cozy spot in a quiet neighborhood with affordable rent. And over time, it's really started to feel like mine. I'd settled into a good rhythm there, comfortable and content. This all went down on a Thursday night, close to 11:30. I was winding down for bed when I suddenly heard violent banging on the front door. It wasn't a knock, it was full-on pounding, like someone was determined to force their way inside. I peered out through the window, but thanks to the poor placement of the porch light, visibility was terrible. Even without seeing clearly, the force of the knocks made it obvious that whoever was outside wasn't calm. Still, I'm a fairly big guy, so I wasn't scared exactly, just annoyed and confused. I opened the front door, but kept the screen locked between us, using it as a barrier. What I saw outside wasn't what I expected. Standing there was a man who looked a little older than me, restless and disheveled. His hair was messy, his clothes looked like he'd been wearing them for days, and he radiated agitation. His eyes darted rapidly, his chest heaved like he was panicked or coming down from a run, and he kept pacing back and forth as if he couldn't stand still. Before I could even ask what he wanted, he blurted out in a furious voice that this was his house. He demanded I open the door and let him in, shouting that I was trespassing and threatening to call the cops if I didn't get out right away. My first thought was drugs, or maybe some kind of breakdown or both. I tried to reason with him, telling him he had the wrong place, but that only sent him into a bigger frenzy. Then came the part that froze me where I stood. He started rattling off specific details about the house. Not things you could guess from outside details. Only someone who had lived there would know. He mentioned how the master bedroom door swings awkwardly into the bathroom toilet. He said the back door sticks, and you need to lift it when you turn the knob. He listed off a few other quirks too, ones I can't even fully recall because I was too stunned in the moment. I didn't respond. I just stared at him, thrown off balance. And then it got even more bizarre. Through the screen door, he pulled out a folder and started flashing documents. Inside were papers that looked like a lease agreement, his name on it, dated for about 6 months before I ever moved in. He also had envelopes of mail addressed to him and my exact address. It all looked legitimate, even if I suspected it was somehow fake. But what rattled me to my core wasn't the paperwork, it was what came next. He pulled out his phone and began showing me photographs. Actual pictures of him inside my house. Shots of him sitting on the couch where I now watch TV, cooking meals in the kitchen, even lying down in the bedroom where I sleep. They looked current, not old, not doctored. And he wasn't alone in them. Either there were other people in some of the shots, none of whom I'd ever seen before. The one that really shook me was a picture he said was from this past 4th of July. It showed a woman I didn't recognize holding the phone for a selfie, with him and several others smiling at my kitchen table. Off to the side sat a box of fireworks, and everything about the photo looked authentic. The lighting, the context, the little details. But I knew where I was on the 4th of July, and it wasn't with strangers inside my own house. At that moment, I honestly started questioning myself. Was my memory unreliable? Had I forgotten something massive? The whole thing left me feeling like reality was cracking. I finally told him I was going to call the police to sort everything out, not as a threat, but because I couldn't think of anything else to do. The second I mentioned the cops, his whole demeanor flipped. He went from frantic to eerily calm. He nodded, said he'd wait outside, then simply walked off into the dark and disappeared. I tried to keep eyes on him from the window, but he melted away into the night. 10 minutes later, officers arrived. I told them everything in detail, but they didn't take it nearly as seriously as I hoped. They suggested I contact my landlord and track down the previous tenants to see if I could learn more. I offered to show my own lease as proof of residency, but they waved it off, saying it was probably just someone in the middle of a mental break. Since he was gone, they figured there wasn't much else to be done. Then they left. I wasn't ready to just let it go. Something about the whole thing gnawed at me, especially with the photos burned into my head. With my landlord's help, I eventually reached the previous tenants. My landlord himself was baffled. He said he didn't know anyone fitting that guy's description and had never rented to anyone like that. And when I spoke to the tenants before me, they also said they'd never heard of him. They'd lived alone in the house for 3 years before moving out. They were just as baffled as I was about how this man could have such intimate knowledge of the property and pictures, no less. For the next couple of weeks, I was jumpy, always expecting him to return. Nothing happened until it did. I came home one night after hanging out with friends to find the house completely trashed. And not in the typical burglary sense. This wasn't about valuables. It looked like someone had been tearing through every room, searching for something specific. Electronics, cash, and other obvious things of worth were untouched, but the place was left in total chaos. The unsettling detail? Police found no signs of forced entry, which meant whoever it was had a key. Combined with what happened earlier, it was almost certain the same man had come back. This time, both the police and my landlord took things more seriously. The locks were changed immediately, new security systems put in place. The working theory was simple. This man truly believed he lived here, and he broke in looking for his things. That alone was disturbing, but it still didn't explain the photos, the documents, or how he had a copy of the key. I still regret not examining the lease agreement he flashed at me that night. Maybe I could have gotten his name or some other clue. The papers and mail could have been forgeries, sure, but the photos? That's the part I can't shake. Maybe they were older pictures with doctored dates, but that explanation doesn't hold up either, since my landlord, who had owned the house forever, didn't recognize him. One of my friends suggested maybe I was up against something not entirely explainable by normal means. I'm not one to believe in the supernatural, but I can't deny the oppressive, eerie feeling I've carried ever since, especially when I'm alone in that house. I still can't make sense of any of it, and all I can do now is hope that chapter is finally closed.